So a few months ago when we were building the program, we decided on 4 tracks: AI and emerging technology, data governance and privacy, visualization and analytics, and data in action. So every session today is going to fall on one of these tracks. You'll see the tracks and colors on the signage and t-shirts and materials throughout your day. If you have not done so already, take out your smartphone and you can scan the QR code, and that's going to give you the full schedule, and you'll have it handy all day. So the breakout sessions will run at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and 2 o'clock. So a few ground rules before we get started. We're expecting some full sessions, particularly in the morning, 10 and 11, and in conference room C, 1 and 4. So if a session's full, we may ask that you show the confirmation email you received from MPH yesterday. We will do everything we can to get you into the preferred sessions that you requested. Thank you in advance for your patience. Also, our networking and sponsor booths are set up in room B, so please stop in throughout the day. And then the hospitality room is in conference A. We have coffee, snacks, beverages. Think of it as a VIP lounge. You're all VIPs, so please stop in there all morning and all afternoon. And then at lunch, we're going to try something a little different this year. The food will be ready at 11:45. And then at 12:15, 4 of our sponsors are going to be hosting some sessions during the lunch hour. Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, and AWS are all presenting. So pick one of those and check your schedule and room locations, and please join them. Again, speaking of our sponsors, thank you to Salesforce, Google, Microsoft, Cyclotron, and AWS for their support. They are the ones making this food and coffee and refreshments today available, and we appreciate it very much. All right, let's get into it. Our keynote session today is going to focus on a topic all of us can't get enough of: artificial intelligence. Many of you were here in the audience a year ago when I made some opening remarks touching on AI. I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly expand and clarify some of the points I made then. So, as a refresher, I made 2 analogies. First, I compared putting AI on top of bad data to building a house on top of a cracked foundation. Secondly, I suggested that data governance activities are kind of like 350-pound offensive linemen, as neither get the headlines, but both are fundamental to winning. Indeed, if you've been in a meeting with me sometime in the last 12 months, you've probably heard one of these talking points come out of my mouth. I've already kind of alluded to the first 2, about the cracked foundation and the headlines. The third, I try to reassure agencies that you're not behind. We're still just at the end of the beginning in the state's AI journey. The last talking point, I made this year's t-shirt. So, data governance is the entry fee for AI. So what do I mean by that? To illustrate, let's just put up a very simplified project plan. Next slide, please. All right. You can all define AI bliss and nirvana however you want. I'm just, in my mind, I'm thinking that is when you put your AI on top of your in-house data, and then all the magic happens. Now, I do not advocate this approach. I'm not saying you have to get all your data in order and then ramp up your AI, right? We can do 2 things at once. We can do data governance and we can build our AI capabilities in parallel. In fact, you can actually use AI to make your data governance better. So you can and you should do both. But here's the thing, this picture does not tell the whole story. Establishing an effective data governance plan is likely going to take as much time and effort as getting up to speed on the AI book. So data governance is the critical path to get you where you want to go. I'm sure there are several data stewards in the audience that are thinking, this slide isn't the whole picture either, and you're correct. So, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to make the point that data governance is not a box that you check. It is not a one task and then it's over. Data governance is an activity that you begin and it goes into perpetuity. That yellow line never stops, just goes off to the side of the page. But here's my bottom line. I'm as excited about AI as the next guy. These tools have the potential to transform state government in ways that we haven't even figured out yet. However, I have jumped ahead. I've read the end of the book. If your agency is spending time on AI, but also isn't devoting attention and resources to data cataloging, data tagging, data quality, and so forth, you're going to have to pay that entry fee sooner or later. All right, let's transition to our panel discussion. Scott, Erik, Stan, if you could come on up. I'm going to introduce them as they get settled. If you could, please hold your applause until I introduce all 3. Scott Wiltsey is Microsoft's AI Workforce Solutions Sales Director. He helps organizations move from experimenting with AI to actually operationalizing it. He's here to give us the industry lens on what deployment looks like at enterprise scale and what the organizations getting it right have in common. Erik Huntoon is the Deputy Director at IUT and the person leading the team responsible for putting Microsoft Copilot into the hands of state employees across Indiana. He brings the practitioner's perspective, what's working, what's been harder than expected, and what state employees are actually doing with these tools. And lastly, Stan Crosley is a nationally recognized voice in data privacy and data governance with more than 25 years experience, including serving as Chief Privacy Officer at Eli Lilly and leadership roles with IAPP and the Future of Privacy Forum. He rounds out this panel by bringing the policy perspective, the guardrails that shape how organizations adopt AI responsibly. Would you please give our panelists a warm round of applause? All right, welcome. Thanks all of you for being here. We're just going to have a little fireside chat. I couldn't get IDOA to actually put a fire here, so it is. But let's kind of have like opening statements, like we're having a debate, I guess. But allow you each to kind of briefly talk about how you can't avoid it. AI is in the newspaper and the headlines everywhere, but the reality inside organizations is usually a bit more complicated than what's in the headlines. Just in a couple sentences, if you could just tell us, where are we actually with AI in the workplace today? So, Scott, let's have you go first.
Sure. So I think at this point, AI has moved beyond the theoretical. I think it's very clear. And what we find across our state and local government community is that at this point, most states, most organizations have either begun or have already deployed AI capabilities. Now, that started in the form of generative AI chat, but it is very quickly transitioning into thinking about how to embed AI into workflows and into business processes and introduce AI agents. So that is really kind of the next phase of AI innovation that many of our customers are looking at across our state and local government community.
Great. Erik?
Yeah, I'll just kind of talk about where we're at in the state of Indiana. So we started rolling out Copilot just over the past couple of months. And we've seen a very strong appetite for that across the state. And in just a few short months, we've already got 3/4 of all eligible employees that have access to Copilot. They've completed training. We've got roughly 1,100 fully licensed users. And we are seeing a lot of questions about when they're going to get access to the agentic side of the house, things like that, which we're working towards. So we're seeing a lot of excitement, just from our user base for getting their hands onto the tools, and we're pretty excited to be where we're at.
And Stan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. We see this playing out really outside of state governments as well, almost identically, right? Multinational corporations. We work with Apple, Chipotle, Amgen, Abbott, and you see almost every one of them has enabled generative AI within a certain subpopulation of the organization. And then within certain units, research and development, in the tech space and the engineering areas, they have much deeper stacks. But what we're starting to see now is awareness that governance creates better AI. That if you don't have curated data sets and you're just running the AI tools across a public data set that you've acquired from an open source, you get a very different result than if you have a curated data set on the back end that you're running against. And so we're starting to see governance play I wouldn't say a more primary role yet. I would say that it's being talked about with more urgency than it has ever been.
It's almost like we coordinated our messages, which we did not. Okay, let's focus on tools a little bit. And lots of folks in this audience have had Copilot in their hands for a couple months, and of course there's other things. So Scott is the represent the company that brings these tools to bear. You also work with other organizations across the country using these tools at scale. So what patterns are you seeing in the organizations that are actually to the point where they're getting value from the tools as opposed to the ones that are still stuck in pilot mode?
Yeah. So I think there are probably two things I'll mention. The first, the most successful organizations and state government customers have broad institutional support for rolling out the technology, right? At the governor level, at the cabinet level. That top-down support drives a lot of great behavior in terms of bringing AI projects forward, end user training, workforce skilling. Good things come out of that. So that would be number one. Number two, I think, goes back to what you talked about earlier, which is data governance. Where we see customers be successful rolling out AI at scale are the same customers who invested in their data estate and making sure that data governance, information protection policies, data classification have been established, or that is a working project to make sure that AI doesn't have unintended consequences in oversharing information. So those are the two things I would reference.
So as the state of Indiana continues looking at other tools, are there certain things we should be looking for, but also like what are the pitfalls or just other things we should be skeptical of?
Yeah, good question. So I think if I look at the AI landscape, I'm sure all of you know, right, there are thousands of AI models that exist out there, that there's new AI models popping up every day. So the question is, as I look at state government, the state governments have invested decades to build a security apparatus and a compliance boundary to make sure that their data stays secure. So I think when customers look at AI, we always want to ask customers, well, how are they thinking about AI and where those engines actually operate, right? Are those AI engines operating within those security and compliance boundaries that you've worked so hard to set up? Or are those AI models and AI engines working outside those security and compliance boundaries? So that would be something clearly that I think is important.
All right, let's move on to Erik. And by the way, on behalf of the 30,000 state employees, we'd like to thank you and your whole team for the efforts you did there. The Copilot wasn't like just a executable file you can run on your PC and you're done. You had a lot of months of effort going into that. So thank you for your team's effort. So as you know, we're in the middle of this rollout, and we have this GCC environment, and it has some protections that you can elaborate on. But just walk us through on the ground what has gone well and what might have been harder than you expected going in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from my perspective, what has gone well, kind of what I touched on earlier, is the rate of adoption. We required mandatory training before users were getting access to Copilot. And there was some thought that might be a bottleneck or a source of friction. And in reality, it really wasn't. We saw, I think, within the first week, roughly a quarter of all state employees had already completed training. And like I mentioned earlier, we were at 3/4 of all eligible employees have completed training. So that has gone really well. We're just kind of seeing now with the license version, that adoption is kind of coming on board. So just the adoption has gone exceptionally well. What's kind of been more difficult, I think, is going to be a recurring theme today, is more on the governance side. We realized real early on that governance is going to be a big part of being able to successfully roll out AI. So we've deployed a baseline sensitivity label along with data loss protection to prevent Copilot from accessing data that's been classified as sensitive. But what that's done is really shown us that there is a lot more work to do, which kind of goes to your slides that you were showing earlier. We've got a project that my team is working on to start implementing a much more comprehensive, large-scale data governance process for the state of Indiana, but obviously a lot of different agencies, a lot of different needs. So there's going to be a lot of working in partnership with the various state agencies to make sure we get that rolled out correctly to suit their needs.
Definitely have a spectrum of where folks are in the technology adoption curve. So yes, lots of enthusiastic people, but there've also been some folks that have been just a little worried about the security of their data. Can you kind of address what safeguards we've put in place there?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to reiterate, and I know this has come out in training quite some of the training sessions that Microsoft has hosted and some of the guidance that we've given. Now, in terms of the data security, like Copilot is maintained directly within the M365 environment. The data is not leaving our tenant. Your prompts aren't leaving the tenant. Files you upload aren't leaving the tenant. Like it's all secured within our environment. And then, as I mentioned, we have the sensitivity labels that we've created that are preventing sensitive information from being used by Copilot. That data includes things like PII, PHI, financial data. So, we've kind of implemented like that baseline level of control plus the just built-in controls as that are part of the Copilot, the enterprise version of Copilot, directly from Microsoft, where that is directly contained within our tenant boundaries. So I think it's really important to remember that because we do get that question all the time of, well, I don't want my prompts or my data going back to train the model. It's not, like, period, not in Copilot. Like if you're using something commercial, just basic free Copilot, yes. Free Gemini, yes. The Copilot that we are providing to the state of Indiana, that is self-contained within our tenant boundary. I think that's kind of important to just hammer home.
Awesome. Appreciate it. What surprised you? What just in terms of what you've seen with the users or something you didn't expect going in?
Early on, we saw some really cool use cases. Like during our pilot phase, like very early on, we had a user report back that they had generated an SOP for a weekly task that they do. The way they went about it, I thought was pretty creative. They created a Teams meeting for themselves and started recording and a screen share, and then they walked through the process, narrating the process, and then ended the meeting, took that transcript, fed it to Copilot, and asked it to generate an SOP. And they reported back that what they got was a fully formatted, like basically ready to go with very minor tweaks, SOP that they could use to go along with the recording they had made. So they basically had like a training thing done within minutes for something they did weekly. We had another example where a user from a different agency, they asked Copilot to evaluate the website of a program that their agency ran. And Copilot generated a document that broke down that program by the sectors that it addressed, with direct links to each page for those individual sectors, and then had a count of how many sublinks were on each page. And then it provided recommendations of how to make the site more searchable by maybe adding metadata here and there, adding cross links to make navigation easier, identified sectors that did not have their own page that maybe should have. So it like generated a real world output that was usable immediately, which was very cool.
Awesome. Yeah, we're just kind of still figuring out all the things we can do with this tool, right? And
Absolutely.
Exciting of just kind of the user groups and just informal interaction, like, oh, what did you do with it? What do you do with that? And it's just going to build and build, I think. So Scott, just back to you. You've kind of heard what Erik's describing, but you've also had exposure to other large scale deployments across the country. So if you could just kind of, how does Indiana stand out with all those?
Yeah, so I'll touch on what I mentioned earlier in that end user. It's not just about end user enablement, it's about end user training and skilling on a persistent basis. So, the one-to-many webinars to get that initial training for things like Copilot is fantastic, but other mechanisms to provide training, whether it be learning circles or champions groups within agencies, are all great ways to share some of that prompt engineering that some of these users are using, so that all those use cases that can bubble up. So any mechanism that agencies, departments, or the state has to share some of those prompts, bring those best practices up, whether it be again prompt in PowerPoint or just a Copilot chat prompt is a fantastic way to really work on ensuring that those prompts are embedded into the workflows that are helping you to be more efficient in your daily work life. So I think that's ultimately where the value of AI will come. Again, having a Gen AI chat engine is fantastic, but when you can embed that into workflows and business processes and actually improve the output of the services that you're providing, that's where the hard work is, but that's ultimately where the value is.
So the time that you take to write a prompt should be longer than the time you write a search in search engine. Is that
Yes.
what you're saying? So yeah, we've got some data scientists on our team that they literally have like 30-page prompts for some of the things they're doing, which is depending on the complexity, what you need to devote. So, all right, let's move to the guardrails. Stan, when I was younger, we'd had a joke that the definition of as an expert is someone who is carrying a briefcase and more than 50 miles from home. That describes neither of you, but you are also still an expert. You advise folks all across the country, even though you reside here in the metro area. So again, thank you for being here today and bringing that. So as you're watching organizations move faster on AI adoption, the policy and regulatory landscape is trying to keep pace. So what does the current state of AI governance look like at the federal and state level? And where do you see the biggest gaps?
Yeah, the biggest gap is going to be hard to address because there's a lot of gaps. But look, in the US, state law, federal law, agency regulations are always reactive. They are never proactive. They are never anticipatory. The legislators really only get feedback from their constituents that something is wrong, that something needs to be addressed, and so laws get passed. It's reactive. Now in Europe, they're sometimes a little bit more proactive, and the way that they've set up their, the union, the member states act roughly as states, and so we can look outside of the U.S. and see that Europe has passed massive laws on data protection and AI. The problem is it wasn't titrated to actually enable innovation. And so you see all of the leaders for AI, all of the frontier labs are either in the US or they're in China or Israel, and none are in Europe at mistrial, but that's it. And so there's the pushback, even in Europe. They're retrenching now in Europe. They're rewriting their data protection law. They're rewriting their AI laws because it's pretty much impossible to develop AI with data in Europe. The US is the exact opposite end of that spectrum, where we have yet to pass really significant AI laws. We have California that has a regulation called ADMT that is it has some glancing below. We have Colorado and Texas that have passed state laws where basically you have to do a high risk processing activity. But none of these are going to change the way that you use AI within your own jobs or really across the US, anybody. This leaves the entire space open for governance. And unlike any other area of governance that we've ever looked at, I mean, data governance, privacy governance, we could put guardrails up and we could establish them and they could stand for a decade and be, reasonably, well serving. With AI and the governance that we're looking at, if you don't have subject matter experts and using a federated model to use the experts to identify the risks that they're seeing in their work every day and then giving them the breaks to apply if they need to, that governance model isn't going to work. And, so we're starting to companies see this. Look, when Benz invented the automobile had no brakes. They had a leather pad that the driver could apply to the wheel. You can imagine how effective that was at high speed, right? The way that drivers braked was they turned off the ignition and coasted and just hoped for the best. Maybe they would hit a kind tree. And so you can imagine that the speeds, driving 50 miles an hour was unthinkable because it was life-threatening. So the cars went 10, 15 miles an hour. If they hit 20, they would be terrified. It wasn't until brakes came along that you actually unleashed the potential for the automobile. And it really is, governance has to be thought of not as, a speed bump or even for AI guardrails. The better analogy is that everybody who has AI capability has a personal braking system that is fairly sophisticated. And so they can go fast, but as soon as they see something, they have the ability to individually apply a brake. How that actually works in practice is the whole game. And that's why you have to have subject matter experts within business units who really understand the context of the use of the tool in their business. If you don't have that, then you have these broad guardrails, and it's like putting an infant in a playpen and thinking that when they hit their teen years, it's still adequate. Except instead of 18 years, you've got about 18 weeks.
I'm gonna stretch the car analogy a bit more. Like, we're kind of in the Wild West. Like, we recognize the need for more guardrails, but where are they going to come from? And you're starting to see, well, different states are experimenting with this or that. How are companies going to try to navigate the patchwork of different regulation? Are we just going to wait for the federal government to act, which may take forever because they can't even do a budget? Is this going to be kind of a voluntary thing, or they're going to make a consortium of states, or where does the agreed upon guardrails come from?
Even if laws get passed, let's say we get a federal AI law, which do not hold your breath. Even an executive order that's attempting to preempt state AI law, this is a long way off still, and very likely. And even if they pass, so even the states that have passed laws, the guardrails they're creating are really still self-governance laws. They are, you have to tell us when you're using high-risk AI. And if you're using high-risk AI, you have to do a full risk assessment and tell us what the risks are, and then what you're using to mitigate those risks. So it's not really a law. I mean, it's not like, if you go over 50 miles an hour, you're going to get a ticket. It's tell us when you go over 50 miles an hour, and then tell us what you're doing about it. And so, even the laws are self-governing for the most part. So, we're not going, and they're going to be outdated so fast. They can't possibly have the type of flexibility and adaptability that you're going to have with your governance program. So really, sitting in this room is the answer to how, AI is going to be safe, how you're going to maintain a trustworthy reputation, and how it's going to be seen, whether it's efficient or a job killer.
Okay, so we have a variety of agencies represented here, many of whom work with more sensitive data and obviously have concerns. What can you tell them? Give them a privacy or governance principle they should keep front of mind as AI tools become part of their workflow.
I think if there was one principle to keep in mind, is that the AI tool doesn't give you immunity. No judge, no prosecutor, no civil plaintiff, no member of the public is going to buy the excuse, we're really sorry we dumped all of your sensitive data publicly, but it was the AI, right? You are accountable when you use that AI tool. It is no different than if you were using any other tool. And so, it may give you broader capabilities. It doesn't give you broader authority.
So Erik, just for a second, back to the implementation side, how does Indiana's AI policy framework shape what you can and can't do with a tool like Copilot? So basically, is governance a speed bump, or is it a true guardrail?
Yeah, in terms of the framework, I definitely think that definitely set the tone for how we have rolled things out. That kind of set the rules in place for what needed to come before launching Copilot for the state of Indiana. So again, I'll use the, previously, like mentioned, we set up the sensitivity labels that were applied to anything in our environment that had been identified to have sensitive information. And then we set up a corresponding data loss prevention policy that would prevent Copilot from interacting with that data. That was one step. We obviously had the mandatory training. We've set up a lot of back-end controls for how Copilot is even allowed, how access is even granted. So we have controls on top of controls even. There's some agencies have opted out from having access to Copilot. So we have controls that fully block every user in that, for those agencies. And even if one of those users were to get into the group that would give them Copilot, the other control still blocks them. So like we've kind of done our due diligence to make sure that, we're doing what we can to, let the people that should have access, put the controls on the data as well as we can. We've created like Power BI dashboards to show usage metrics that is accessible to, like IT leadership or agency leadership so they can kind of judge usage and make informed decisions. And I think that all comes from the governance sessions that we went through, IoT working in partnership with MPH over the past 7-8 months, since mid 2025 to kind of get this right. So in terms of if it's a speed bump or a guardrail, it's honestly, it's a little bit of both. It would be very easy for me to just go flip the switch and Copilot is on for everybody. But in reality that, that framework puts in that speed bump, which gives you that pause to really make sure you take the time and you do things right. You think about, what needs to be done, you implement those controls. And I think that's what we've done to enable, rolling out Copilot at scale to dozens of state agencies.
Okay. So we've had the tools perspective, the implementation perspective, and the governance perspective. Now we're going to talk about strategy, which you can all weigh in on. Okay. So you've got agency leaders in this room. Right now we're kind of experimenting and tinkering with AI, but we want to move towards how do we use this as a strategic tool. So we're going to get all jazzed up today and go back to our desk tomorrow. So what's kind of something you want folks in that position to do when they get back to the real world tomorrow?
Sure. Well, I've talked a little bit about the training and continuing end user education that needs to be part of any AI plan, but I'll just go beyond that and talk about that phase 2 wave of AI, and that is really embedding AI into business processes and workflows to really help transform how you deliver services. I think that's where the opportunity lies over the next 12 or 18 months for our state and local government customers. So, my encouragement would be, like, as you go back to your agencies and or look at your departments, or where do you have the biggest bottleneck in processes? Where are you spending the most amount of human capital? Start there, right? Just pick some workflow, pick some business process that could benefit from the introduction of AI into the business process, or an AI agent that can help. Start there, right? Get that deployed, measure the results, and then move on to that next business case. So I think starting with those first initial use cases to embed that AI into your agency or department's workflows are ultimately where success will lie for most of our customers over the next 6, 12, 18 months.
Erik?
Yeah, kind of similar to that. My recommendation would be, to clearly identify a problem you're trying to solve. Start with that, and then identify the data that is needed, that the AI tool would be needing to have access to. Where does that data live? Is that data clean and ready to be used by AI? What governance needs to be built around that data? And then start with that. And then once you have like that clearly defined, then it becomes a lot easier to kind of build up the governance and the guardrails around that. So it's kind of tailored to the use case, and it's going to greatly increase the probability of a successful deployment to solve that specific need.
How about you, Stan?
I think that's brilliant. The idea of identifying the use case, what problem you're trying to solve, that makes things so much easier from a governance perspective. I have so many clients that we work with where they say, well, we're rolling out generative AI. And you're like, well, why are you doing that? Well, because there's a lot of pressure to start using the tool. And that's always a bad idea, right? Because people are pretty creative. And so they'll find ways to use the tool. So the direction of what's the problem you're trying to solve is so spot on. And the way that we talk about governance, it is in fact by use case. You just cannot generally do governance. It has to be use case specific. And one thing you might want to think about as agencies, we do a lot of exercises where we'll do kind of group risk identification. MIT has a risk registry for AI. It now has 1,600 AI risks. It's up 200% in 18 months, right? And you can't possibly, try and control for all those risks. But what you can do within your agency, you all probably know what the risks will likely be within the agency that you're going to face. Identify those, prioritize them, and say, these are the things we're watching for first. And that allows you to then start setting up, well, then what are the governance mechanisms to identify those that we do? Use the expertise you have within the agency to do that. It's the best way we've found to get started on it.
Yeah, again, for all of you, just as we look out 12 to 18 months, there's just state government and other agencies and organizations across the country are going to try to move this to the next level. What is going to define the entities that get it right versus the ones that are going to continue to struggle? And you don't have to go in order. Anybody can weigh in.
I mean, I think that
You're all too polite.
I look, this one does. That's why I'm an attorney and not a tech guy. The defining characteristic, looking at the organization and kind of looking back, will be those organizations who did this correctly will have increased efficiency, but they will also maintain or even improve the trust that the public has in them. And if they don't do it well, you'll see trust diminish, engagement from the public, from consumers decrease, and ultimately models collapse. And so, and if in 12 months you haven't yet started, you're not going to be 12 months behind. You'll be 2 or 3 years behind.
Anybody else?
I'll just mention, again, I go back to what I talked about, the embedding of AI into business processes and workflows. And I'll talk about it in the context of the population of the citizens that you're serving. So I think ultimately that output can be measured by how well and what is the improvement in the services being delivered by the agency, whether it be someone who's doing eligibility and intake work, or helping someone apply for Medicaid for the first time, like being able to embed AI to help citizens with accessing the government services that they need, especially since many access government services in a time of crisis or need, I think is a great way to focus that attention where AI will make the biggest impact.
And I kind of reiterate, I think, kind of what several have said already. I think the successful organizations are going to be the ones that kind of focus on clearly defined areas that AI can solve a problem for, instead of trying to put AI into everything all at once. That's going to give you a successful path to implementing something that is going to solve a need versus just a lot of half-baked AI that is really not doing what you need, and it's just kind of noise at that point.
We're going to have time for Q&A in just a minute. So think of questions. If you have some, we'll come up to the mic. But before we move to that, is there any question I didn't ask you? Like, is there something that on your mind that just kind of something you want to leave the folks with to remember from this topic? Okay, just do.
I'd say
This happens a lot when people are around me.
it's spread.
They kind of come down to my level.
Data is and then that is going to really help define.
I'll just add one thing. I'll just say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to come in and speak with you today, and the opportunity to present over lunch. So it's a great day when I can get in the field and talk to our customers. So thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, have time for a couple questions. If you just want to come up Anybody, just don't be shy. I'll put the microphone right here on the stand, and you've got 3 really smart people here. Take advantage.
Good morning. It's frustrating. Scott, one of the biggest frustrations I have is Copilot is not aware of the guardrails that are in place. So often it'll lead me through a lengthy prompt response session, and I get to the point where I say, make it so. This is, I can't. I'm not allowed to. But it'll even go through iterations of, well, yeah, I can do it if you just give me this. If you just give me this. If you just give me this. And then finally it breaks down and says, oh yeah, you've been turned off to do that. Can we get some visibility, self-awareness of those guardrails into the system?
So some of that, there is a little bit, our environment is a GCC environment. All the same capabilities as a commercial enterprise environment for Copilot. Like GCC always lags a little bit behind. So some of what you described where you're asking it to do something and it may say, I can't do that. There are certain things that we know are coming soon with GCC where it's going to unlock Copilot to be able to do a lot more that is already in commercial. In terms of like the guardrails we put in place, like interacting with sensitive data, that should happen instantly. Like as soon as you try to use a file that is labeled, that will instantly get blocked. If you're trying to get a specific output, some of that is just a limitation in the tool. And some of that is just, the GCC environment where we do lag a little bit behind, and some of that is coming soon.
Yeah, I'll just mention that, following on that point, our GCC environment is something that we intentionally stood up at this point, probably over a decade and a half ago, if not more, to fulfill the unique requirements that our state and local government customers have, whether it be with IRS data, CGIS data, health data. But what has always come with that are the delay of services and new capabilities that will always show up first in our commercial cloud environments. And I know that's, like, transparently, that's always tends to be a little bit of a frustration. Why can't I have that? It's coming, right? But when we make a commitment to operate on trust and have very strong enterprise data protection policies and data protection agreements, and to make sure that we can live up to the standard, whether it be IRS Pub 1075 or some of the CGIS requirements, that we won't compromise those standards. And some of that means a little delay in when those services will show up in our GCC environment. But again, that's an important principle, and it's exactly why we stood up that environment, like I said, a decade and a half ago.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Hi. Some economists have been concerned about the general environment of the AI industry. Some have called it, compared it to a bubble. Is there a concern with the state government that should something happen to the AI industry, we might be left holding the bag, so to say, with a platform that we can't support ourselves?
I don't believe so. Just the way Copilot embeds within Microsoft 365. So it's a tool that embeds, within our Microsoft environment. So if for some reason it just went away, the entirety of our environment would still be there. Like all the services that M365 is built on, those would all still be there. It would be the AI tool just may not be there, but I honestly can't see that happening. At least I'll defer to you on that.
Yeah. Well, look, it's clear that, AI is all the rage, and there is AI euphoria. And if I rewind the clock and think back almost 3 decades ago, 2.5 decades ago, that euphoria was the internet, right? That euphoria was pets.com. That euphoria was a whole host of companies and services that had nothing behind it. And there was the internet bubble, right? There was a crash. It didn't mean that the internet wasn't the most transformative technology that we've seen ever. It was, but there was euphoria, there was some reality, and then that transformation occurred. And I think, clearly there's some euphoria around AI. Again, as I mentioned, there's 2, 3, 4,000, thousands of companies rolling out novel AI models that have astronomical valuations, right? Are those companies going to survive? Well, we'll see, right? But I think the evidence is clear that when we look back 10 years from now, that the AI will be that transformative technology, just like the internet was almost 25 years ago, or more than 25 years ago.
Here we go.
Yeah, we got folks in the other room, so.
My question's specifically for Erik. You talked about the governance and the safeguards within the state tenant. My agency is one of the ones that opted out to begin with. How do I alleviate concerns of interagency data leakage, specifically around unflagged sensitivity levels?
Great question. For one, I would recommend reaching out and let's actually have a conversation about that. Like my team, MPH, we can directly meet and address those questions, very directly. But in terms of, this setting, what Copilot has access to is what you have access to. So if you don't have access to another agency's data, Copilot's not going to have it either. So as long as the permissions are all set correctly, which, my team does a really good job of making sure that is done. You're just not going to have cross-agency data. It just doesn't work that way. But that's where I would really recommend let's schedule a meeting, and then we can actually talk about that. We can kind of go through the protections that we have in place, more, involved. But
All right, time for one more question. Anybody? Yeah.
Hi, my message is to Scott. So as AI is advancing, Anthropic, ChatGPT, OpenAI, they're releasing newer and newer models. However, we are still kind of lagging behind in the GCC environment and kind of talking about the breaks, their Anthropic's enrolling enterprises into using Project Glasswing and stuff as that. What's Microsoft's commitment to making or bringing the parity to the GCC environment to more current models?
Thanks for the question. So two things. Number one, I talked about kind of our GCC, our commitment to our customers in terms of making sure we're living up to our trust and responsible AI principles. That will always mean there's a slight lag, but I do want to address the question. So what we are moving to, and you see this in our commercial environments, when we first got in the AI space, it was single model. We had ChatGPT, the GPT-4o was the model that supported our environment, but that has been changing. We are changing now from being a single model provider to a multi-model provider. Right behind the scenes, we may be using different models based upon the prompt and the request that you may be making, but where we are going, and we see this in our commercial tenants already, is that we are moving to a model choice environment, right? So from single model, multi-model to model choice, so that you as an end user can, for example, select, if you like, Anthropic's models, fantastic. You can use Claude in your prompting versus a GPT model. So that is the evolution of our cloud strategy when it comes to giving our customers model choice, right? And that really fits into what Microsoft has been and continues to be as a company, right? We're a platform company at the end of the day. And so part of our AI platform, whether it be with how our users are interacting with the AI models, or what's called Agent 365, which is something that's coming to help customers manage agents. We want to make sure that we're providing a platform, not just to manage Microsoft stuff. We want to make sure we're providing, for example, an agent management platform that manages agents built by Microsoft, third-party providers, whether it be PeopleSoft or ServiceNow or you name it. So that's the evolution that we're moving towards, and that will be coming to our GCC environment.
All right, so we're out of time. I will just point out that, Scott, you've got a lunch session if folks want to interact with you more. Stan, you're doing a session at 2 if folks want to have more conversation. And you can probably find Erik's phone and email on your AI.gov if you have more questions for him. So let's thank our panelists one more time.